Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This study session of the Wayne Westland Board of Education will now come to order. We're going to begin our meeting this evening with a pledge allegiance to the flag led by Dr. Andre Townsend. Dr. Townsend. Thank you, Dr. Townsend. Mr. Neal, will you call the roll, please?
Dr. Weaver,
Here.
Ms. Hines,
Present.
myself, present, Mrs. Walker,
Present.
Mrs. Madell,
I'm here.
Mr. Buckler,
Here.
and President Cox,
I'm here.
all present.
And I'll serve the next item on the agenda. Next item on the agenda, 445.19, is citizens' comments on items which appear on this evening's agenda. I have a blue sheet from Mr. Don Harris, the president of the Wayne Westland Education Association. Mr. Harris, good evening.
Good evening, all. Thanks. I'm Don Harris, as President Cox said. I represent the largest union district. That's the WWEA.
You're at that age where you can use them, but not really?
I'm tweening,
Oh.
yeah. I've worked for, I've been employed but for 28 years in Wayne Westland. The past 9 years, I have been the elected president. I've worked under Superintendent Barcy, Dr. Harmala, Dr. Holt, and alongside interim Joe Simmons in that capacity. My experience with the superintendents has been educational. Our district needs someone with integrity, a person that treats, I'm speaking about what I think we need. The WWEA thinks what we need for our superintendent. Our district needs someone with integrity, a person that treats others with empathy and compassion, someone willing to look at the other party at the table equally. Wayne Westland District has many viable human resources that should be utilized. In today's labor relations, both management and labor need to work together to solve solutions, or for solutions. Both sides have legitimate concerns, and both provide a valuable resource working collaboratively. The district needs to be careful not to hire someone who will not only be short-term to fill their resume for the future, we also need someone committed to Wayne Westland, not to fill their ego. I want to also state that at a previous superintendent hiring process, the third-party facilitator appeared to push the school board for a candidate which subsequently was hired. If the board cannot decide on a board-chosen candidate from the candidate pool, then they should start the process all over again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anyone else would like to address the board? The next item on our agenda is 446.19, and to begin this part of the agenda, let me just say that this is a study session, and as such, it's going to be somewhat more informal than a meeting would be. And it is not typical that the board would have a study session, which is in this room, on video for this purpose. But what we are about to embark upon, this being the first meeting that the board has sat in order to discuss a permanent superintendent, is obviously very impactful to our communities and the school district, all of the children that go to school here, and all of the people that work here. And several months ago, one of the parents got up at a meeting and they said, how was the last superintendent hired? This is certainly a fair question. And when I contemplated as the president, the framework for this process falls to me. Rather than have this meeting in the study session room where it would typically occur, where some people might be able to attend if their schedules allowed them to, I decided to have it here so anyone who wanted to see the deliberations and what you're about to see could do so just by getting into the district website and watching this video. In other words, there needs to be complete transparency. Transparency for what the board is faced with doing, which is, as I said, very impactful and consequential for our communities, but also how we arrived at this decision. And in order to create a framework where I felt everybody could be heard equally, I asked all members of the Board of Education to augment an agenda which I had prepared. And I told every member of the board that I would receive from all members whatever suggestion they wanted to have discussed by the board in anonymity, meaning that the issue could be presented to me. I would put it on the agenda so the whole board could discuss the issue without anyone knowing which board member it came from, so that everything could be addressed honestly and openly, so that everyone in the community could see the deliberation. And about halfway through that process, it came to my attention that the gentleman that's in the room I'm going to introduce in just a moment has already done all this work for us and has a great deal of experience in doing this. And the framework for the decision we are about to make will be presented tonight. These are the kind of things the Board of Education has to think about when they hire a superintendent. So without any further comments, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jay Bennett. Jay is the Assistant Director of Executive Search Services for the Michigan Association of School Board. And I'm going to hand the mic over to him. Jay, you have the floor. Good evening.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So in front of you, you have a packet that is representative of the slide presentation that is behind you and over there to your left. So feel free to follow along as we work our way through these slides. Any questions as we're working through this, please feel free to interject. Don't feel the need to hold your questions till the end. I'll address everything as we go along. So yes, my name is Jay Bennett, as was stated. I'm the Assistant Director of Executive Search Services. My primary responsibilities for the Michigan Association of School Board focus on superintendent search and superintendent evaluation. I'm here tonight to present to you a presentation on what board members need to know as you go through this process of search. So we'll start with, the Michigan Association of School Boards are experts in search. We have over 35 years experience and over 700 searches. We have the most extensive search network in the nation. Our agenda for tonight, we'll be talking about the role and leadership of the board. We'll be talking about superintendent job description. We'll be talking about effective school district leadership. We'll be talking about roles and responsibilities of the superintendent, qualifications of the superintendent, the search environment, Open Meetings Act and FOIA, overview of the basic search process, stakeholder engagement, and then a timeline. So with regard to the superintendent, the board is responsible for recruiting, hiring, and evaluating performance. That is your responsibility as a Board of Education. You hire, you fire, you evaluate. When we think about the superintendent and the job description, one of the first questions that we like to ask is, do you have one? So do you have a job description for your superintendent?
Yes.
Okay. Neola Policy 1230 covers responsibilities of the superintendent. Are you a Neola board?
No.
You are not. Okay. So the things that we'll talk about here are relevant to Neola policy, but they are very relevant to policy in general and probably are, a good, yardstick for you to measure as to where your policy is as it relates to the responsibility of the superintendent. I'm not going to read through all of this, bullet by bullet. You have the information there in front of you, but just kind of some highlights here. Responsibility of the superintendent to keep the board informed of school operations, to ensure that all aspects of the district operation comply with state laws and regulations, to establish and maintain written educational plans, to ensure proper implementation of current district-wide instruction, strive to increase the efficient use of district resources, assignment of staff, evaluate the progress of the professional and support staff, analyze results of the instructional programs, recommend changes in instructional staff, working with principals, working cooperatively with parents and community groups, developing personal capabilities, working cooperatively with the board and administrative staff, strive toward the highest standards of personal conduct, and anything else that the duties, other duties as the board may direct. So that infamous other duties as assigned, as it were. So just some quick things that I think it's important to keep in mind as you think about the responsibilities of the superintendent in your district. So school district leadership that works. So we've got some research here on what it is that effective educational leaders do. So this is based on a meta-analysis, which is research on the research, over 2,800 school districts, 3.4 million students, rigorous quantitative methods to come up with some of the following. We know, based on the research, that effective superintendents include all relevant stakeholders, including central office staff, building level administrators, and board members in establishing goals for the district. We know that effective superintendents ensure that collaborative goal setting results in non-negotiable goals in two areas. So student achievement and classroom instruction. So those superintendents that understand, those boards that understand that student achievement and classroom instruction are the non-negotiables, those are the districts that see academic progress. So as I said, those districts with higher levels of student achievement, academic achievement, the local boards of education are aligned with the superintendent on the fact that those two non-negotiables are achievement and instruction. Effective superintendents continually monitor district progress and make sure that they're informing the board and the community as to what that progress is, and then looking at that progress and refiguring out, taking a look at the goals, making adjustments to make sure that the things that the district, the things that the community, the things that the staff, the things that the board have said are important are being done and are being accomplished. Effective superintendents ensure that the necessary resources, including time, money, personnel, and materials, are allocated to accomplish district goals. You can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't have the support of your staff, if you don't have the money to implement these things, if you don't have the support of your board and your community, then you're not going to see the progress on those goals that you would like. So you need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, as it were. Superintendents. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about qualifications. So as you're looking at your candidates, you need to know that your superintendent must hold a valid administrator certificate issued by the Michigan Department of Ed. They must accumulate 150 hours of professional learning every 5 years in order to renew their certificate. They can be hired without a certificate. However, a process must be followed or fines equivalent to the superintendent's annual salary will apply. So, if you hire a non-certified applicant for your next superintendency, prior to the first day of employment, the board has to get together with someone on your staff, have to log into the MOEC system, which is the certification system for the state. You have to include in that MOEC system the rationale for hiring a non-certified person. So we hired a non-certified person. We hired the bank president because we think the bank president is going to be the best candidate for our superintendency. So you have to put that rationale in there. You have to verify that that candidate has, at the minimum, a bachelor's degree from an accredited university, and then you have to get verification that that individual will be assigned a mentor. So if you hire the bank president, they have to have a bachelor's degree, they have to be assigned a mentor. Within 6 months of hire, they have to start a process to get that administrative certification, and they have to complete that process within 3 years. As you're looking at your candidates, some things to consider. So, we should be looking for some professional accomplishments. We should be looking for their education background and related advanced degrees. We should be looking at professional development specific to school superintendency. So, Department of Education approved programs such as MASA Horizons, the Leadership Academy put together by the Michigan Leadership Institute, their SUPS Academy, advanced coursework in administration and education. You want to see a history of district-wide responsibilities, contract negotiations, operations, budget development, etc. This is especially important if you're looking at candidates that have not been a superintendent in the past. If you're looking at central office administrators, assistant superintendents, finance directors, curriculum directors, building principals, special education directors, those types of positions that have not been a superintendent before, you want to make sure that they have within their background and experiences those experiences which translate well to being a superintendent. So if they are a high school principal, have they had experience on the negotiation team? Okay, so were they part of the negotiation team when it came to contracts as a high school principal or as a finance person? Have they had responsibilities with a budget? All right, so a lot of times the high school principal may have the responsibility for the high school budget, or the curriculum director may have the responsibility for the curriculum budget. So what kind of budgeting experience do they have? So you want to make sure that when you're looking at those candidates that have not been a superintendent specifically, what kinds of roles have they had in their past that will translate well to being a superintendent? When you're looking at those candidates that have been a superintendent, okay, what kinds of districts are they coming from? Generally speaking, if they have been the superintendent in a smaller district, they probably were responsible for just about everything. Because in the smaller districts, they're the superintendent, they're the curriculum director, they're the special ed director, they're wearing lots of hats. Superintendents that are coming from larger districts, they are surrounded, generally speaking, by a team. So they have a curriculum director, they have a finance director, they have an HR person. That doesn't mean that they don't have experience in those areas, but they may not have quite the experience in those areas. So you just want to kind of keep those things in mind as you're looking at your applicants, okay? So when we talk about the superintendent's role versus the board's role, the superintendent is looking at, when we talk about vision, the superintendent is kind of addressing the how. So they're looking at the implementation. The board is looking at the actual establishing. They're looking at the what. When we talk about district structures, superintendent recommends, the board aligns. When we talk about district progress, the superintendent monitors reports, the board evaluates. Community relations, the superintendent recommends, the board approves. Performance, superintendent evaluates, board ensures compliance, supports, takes responsibility. When we talk about the level of engagement, superintendent hands-on, board eyes in, okay? As the board, when we talk about your leadership in this process of searching for your superintendent, the board has to remember that selecting the superintendent is the most important decision that you as a board will make. Effective, high-functioning boards tend to have better outcomes related to superintendent search and selection, and the clearer the picture of the type of leader that you're looking for, the easier it is for whatever firm, whoever it is that you hire to help you with this process, it makes it easier for them to help you find that next great candidate for the board. So, some key questions before a search. Is a search needed, or do we have a viable, qualified internal candidate? So that's a question that you as a board have to come to grips with. If you have a viable, qualified internal candidate, then you may not want to do a full search. If you don't, then you're most likely going to want to do a full search. So that's something that as a board you need to figure out. School boards, as you think about your superintendent search, and this echoes some of your comments at the beginning of your presentation, President Cox, you have to be deliberate and have to make a decision in public. You have to adhere to the Open Meetings Act. You have to follow your own policy or make the decision to set it aside in public. Good governance. Internal candidates can be vetted in public. So if you have a strong internal candidate, we still encourage you to vet them in public, have an opportunity for the public to ask questions and whatnot. But we want to make sure that we're doing all of this in an open meeting. We want to do all of this and be as transparent as possible throughout the entire procedure. So when is a search firm necessary? If you determine that a search firm is necessary, you need to think about what your policies say. So if you have a policy that requires you to do a formal RFP, then you're going to want to put together a formal RFP. If you don't have policies regarding RFPs, or if there is a limit that your district has and you fall under that limit for search, then you need to decide how you're going to select a search firm. There's a variety of ways to do it. If you issue a formal RFP, request for proposals, then you would post that on your website. You would send that out to those firms in which you would want to solicit proposals from, and they would give you proposals. If you want to just up and select a search firm, that is within, as long as that's not in violation of your policies, that is within your province as well. You could just solicit proposals from those organizations that you think you might want to work with. So again, it's a policy and a procedure that you as a board need to figure out. So look at your policies, think about how you've done it in the past, and then just make sure that however you do it, you're doing it consistently with past practices. So right now, our average pool is right around 30 applicants, give or take. If possible, internal candidates should be explored prior to conducting a full search. And the reason that we recommend that is that if there is a clear internal candidate, it does have the possibility of decreasing your interested applicants a little bit. Because of the way the Open Meetings Act and the Sunshine Laws that we have in the state of Michigan, generally speaking, we are not going to release the names of candidates until they've accepted an interview, okay? And so candidates, especially candidates that are current sitting superintendents, are reluctant to put themselves into a pool of applicants if they don't think they have a legitimate shot at getting the job. And if they see a strong internal candidate, then you may miss out on some candidates because they'll be reluctant to put themselves out there knowing that, well, there's a strong internal candidate and I don't have a chance and I'm not going to put myself in jeopardy with my board or with my community. And so as a result, if we have a strong internal candidate, we want to make sure we vet that process. And if we decide that we're going to go with a full-on search, then we just have to have that in mind, okay? Courtesy interviews are not a good practice. So I don't want, I would not recommend to you as a board that you grant an interview to especially, to a district employee that you have a great amount of respect for, just out of the think, well, it's just the right thing to do. I would never recommend that you interview anybody that you're not ready to give the job to, okay? So just something to keep in mind. So when we talk about the types of applicants that you're going to be getting for this particular job, now, I understand that your previous superintendent did come to you from out of state, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's unique in that a vast majority of our candidates are not coming from out of state. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One of the reasons is relocation is expensive, okay? And, back in the day, as they say, the superintendent may have been the primary, breadwinner for the family, and the family would just move with the superintendent from district to district, from state to state, county to county, whatever. Now that we have more two-income households, not only is the superintendent relocating, but then their spouse is relocating as well, and so that provides another layer of somebody having to find a job. And so that is another reason that we don't see as many out-of-state applicants. The sunshine laws that we have in the state, again, another reason. In some states, it is part of their process where they don't release the name of the candidate until they've actually made a contract offer. So until they've signed a contract with a candidate, until that point, nobody's name has been released. Because of the way we have it set up in Michigan, an out-of-state candidate, as soon as their name is released, now their in-state board or their in-state employees know that they've applied for a job in Michigan. And so, again, that can provide some reluctance to people saying, well, I don't know that I want to put myself out there like that. The position itself is less attractive than it used to be, and Michigan has a less attractive retirement system than some of the other states. So those are some of the reasons that we don't see a lot of out-of-state candidates. If we do see out-of-state candidates, generally it's in those districts that are along our southern border. So, those districts that kind of are not too far from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, or if we get up into the Upper Peninsula, we do get some candidates for some of those districts that are close to Wisconsin and Minnesota. The other reason when we get out-of-state applicants are those applicants that are looking to move back home. So they grew up in Michigan, they have family in Michigan, they're looking to move closer to parents, aging parents, they're looking to be closer to grandkids, whatever. But for the most part, we're not seeing a lot of out-of-state applicants for the jobs we have in Michigan. So just something to consider. Some other things that affect the candidate pool, we already talked about retirements that increase job uncertainty, and then the Sunshine Law, the Open Meetings Act. So generally speaking, this was last year. We filled our vacancies with 35% of our vacancies across the state were filled by sitting superintendents, 38% by principals, and then 27% by frontline staff. This was a little bit higher than I've seen in previous years. Only because when I say higher, I mean from the superintendent side, and I think a lot of that had to do, we filled some pretty big superintendent jobs last year as far as size of district, and so the bigger a district, the more likely it is to attract current sitting superintendents and end up hiring current sitting superintendents. The smaller districts are generally not getting superintendents for their first superintendency, and so they're generally, the smaller districts are hiring current central office, assistant superintendents, high school principals, middle school principals, elementary school principals. A district of your size, I would anticipate, and you know what they say about assuming, but I would anticipate that you would see quite a few current sitting superintendents that would be interested in this particular job. You will also see assistant superintendents from other districts. You will also see curriculum directors, special education directors. You will see some building principals and whatnot. When we talk about the pure numbers, if we think about it, it makes sense that we have more principals and frontline staff becoming superintendents because, well, numbers-wise, we just have more of those in the state, right? Every district has one superintendent, but they have several building principals, they have several front office staff, and so as a result, there's just more people out there with those particular jobs. Cost factors of search. Search is going to cost you anywhere from, on average, $5,000 to $90,000. There's a variety of factors that play into that. The experience and maturity of the board, community involvement, district condition, challenges and opportunities, compensation range, and then also the turnover rate. As a service organization, we are basing our fee on student count. So all meetings of a public body shall be open to the public. All decisions of a public body shall be made at a meeting open to the public, and all deliberations of a public body constituting quorum of its members shall take place at a meeting open to the public unless as otherwise specified in the Act. So in my experience in doing superintendent search, the only time that I've ever gone into closed session for a search are for one of two reasons. If we have several internal candidates and discussing their candidacy in an open meeting runs the risk of exposing their identity, then we will discuss those internal candidates in a closed session, but we will only discuss those internal candidates, and then we will come into open session and discuss the rest of the candidates, okay? The other reason that we may go into closed session is if you administer any kind of behavioral testing to your candidates, then the results of those behavioral testing can be discussed in a closed session. It has been our attorney's interpretation that discussion of those results are akin to discussing HIPAA or medical results. So they fall under HIPAA. So if you administer any kind of behavioral testing to your candidates, then you can have a discussion of those results in a closed session. Other than that, I have never taken a board into a closed session during a superintendent search. So before the search, you have to consider that seeking a new position is a very risky proposition for practicing superintendents. As I said, they're putting themselves out there. The more confident the candidates are in the confidentiality of the search process, the more likely they will be to apply for the position. Candidates are entitled to complete confidentiality until they accept an interview, and then we encourage board members to refrain from checking out candidates until they've actually accepted that interview. I would hate for you to inadvertently tip somebody off that so-and-so is a candidate before they've actually accepted an interview. So we ask that you lean on your search firm to do some of that background vetting before you offer those interviews. And then once you offer those interviews and those interviews have been accepted, then you can start to do a little bit more checking on their background and whatnot, because they've now said that, yeah, I'll be a candidate. The exception to that is, if a candidate is willing to waive their confidentiality, then we can do some digging beforehand. But for the most part, your investigation of those early candidates are going to be on paper. So it's going to be based on their letters of reference, based on their resume, based on their previous job experiences, and the like. It is critically important for each board member to understand that all printed materials that appear at the board table are subject to FOIA, either by the media or private citizen. So any kind of notes that you take during your interview process, any kind of writing that you do during the search process is open to FOIA. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're writing down, your thoughts and reflections on the interviews, your thoughts and reflections on candidates, things like that, that all of those things are open to FOIA. Some danger zones. So if you hear any search consultant come up and give you a pitch about the types of things that they're going to do for you during search, and you hear some of the following, I would turn and go the other way. So the search consultant said they do a targeted search for us and there'll be no need for lots of interviews. That's not a good thing. Let's just get together for dinner and get to know the candidates. That constitutes an interview. That is a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Don't do it. I think I'll call the candidate to ask if. Again, that constitutes an interview. Even if an individual board member reaches out to an individual applicant, that does still constitute an interview. You can only interview as a board, and you have to do that in an open meeting. So one single individual reaching out to one single individual does constitute a violation of the Open Meetings Act. If we email them and just ask them a few questions, we don't have to call them candidates. Again, you're running the risk of that being construed as an interview, and we can only do interviews in an open public meeting. Generally speaking, for a search, you're looking at a process that is going to be around 13 to 14 weeks. Now, working with your search firm, you can make some adjustments to that calendar, but that's pretty much the calendar that you're going to be looking at. I would suspect that you're not looking to have a candidate in place for a January 1 start. Would that be an accurate assumption?
I wouldn't make an assumption about that.
Okay. If you were attempting to put somebody in place for a January 1 start, you're looking at a very tight timeline.
I'll concede that.
Yeah. And so, if you're asking, and you're not, so I'm just going to give it to you. If you're asking my advice on that, I would not recommend trying to squeeze a search in between now and the end of the year. It's not going to be, it wouldn't be a viable search. I would not recommend it. The other thing you also have to consider is a mid-year start for a current sitting superintendent is going to be very difficult to pull off, because they're going to be leaving their district in the lurch. And so a mid-year start for a current superintendent, while not impossible, would be a little bit more difficult because, as I said, they're leaving their district in a position where now they have to fill their superintendency in the middle of the year. Because we know that by law, we have to have a superintendent, okay? So while I'm not saying that you wouldn't be able to hire somebody before, by January, I'm saying it would be very difficult, and I don't know that it would be a best practice. So I will just say it that way. So just something to consider as you go through this process. There is a preparation phase that we would talk about. This preparation phase is starting with establishing that timeline. We then talk about defining the roles, so the roles of the board members and the board as a whole, the role of your consultants and your search firm, the role of your administrative support at the district. We start by creating a candidate profile that we're going to solicit from online surveys, face-to-face conversations, and feedback forms. Any search firm that comes in and says that they don't need to do community and staff input, again, I would not recommend that you take a look at avoiding that part. I think that community input, those face-to-face conversations with the staff and the community members is a very important part of the search process, and I would never recommend that a board avoid that or skip over that part and go right to the posting and the hiring and the interviews and all that. You have to do that community input and that staff input first. All right. So during that board workshop and that planning, you're going to talk about the search process, set up those roles and responsibilities that we talked about. You're going to adopt that calendar and timeline so that everyone knows when all the meetings are, when they need to be here, so that the community knows when the meetings are so they can attend. We get a preliminary posting up, and the preliminary posting basically just says, hey, the job's open, okay? And then as you start to collect that input, you create that selection criteria, and that selection criteria says, okay, so we've listened to the community, the staff, the board. These are the things that we're looking for in our next superintendent. That then gets added to the posting, and then applicants, okay, so I saw that job is open, so I'm going to wait for that criteria to come out. Okay, now I see the search criteria. Well, they're looking for somebody that has experience as a superintendent, experience in a urban suburban district, experience in K-12 education, and well, I'm a bank president, so I don't fit that criteria. I'm probably not going to apply for the job, okay? And so that selection criteria helps you as a board define this is what we're looking for in our candidates. Your search firm should then hold you to that search criteria. And so if you as a board start talking about candidates that don't meet that search criteria, then your search firm should remind you that, hey, you can talk to this candidate if you'd like, but I just want to remind you that this candidate does not meet the search criteria that you have set. So, salary comparison. So, giving you a salary comparison, taking a look at your district, other districts within your general vicinity that are similar size, similar demographics, just to get an idea as to what the salaries are looking like out there, so that when you post that job, you can have a salary that's going to represent what it is that you're willing to pay your next superintendent. We want you to establish a salary range before the search begins, so that it can be part of that preliminary posting, and it should reflect the type of candidate you're seeking. And remember, when supply is low and demand is high, prices and salaries increase, okay? The salary range also removes doubt as to the board's intention. The board must be prepared to honor both ends of the spectrum. So if you post, and I'm just throwing numbers out there, so I'm going to make them really low so as not to insult you. So if you said that you're willing to pay from $50,000 to $75,000, which, by the way, is way too low, but I'm just using it as an example, you would have to be willing to pay at the 50 and also pay at the 75. I'd be more than happy to let you go over. I would never recommend that you go under. So if you set 50 as the basement, don't try to offer somebody 45 because they don't have the experience that you're looking for. That's bad business, right? Now, if you get somebody that's very experienced and they're willing to come in for 100 but not 75, well, as a board, you have that flexibility to increase. But I would never recommend that you go below that. Remember that high experience, high talent means high money. High talent, low experience, you might be able to pay closer to the bottom end of your scale, okay? But if you've got a high talent, high experience person, you're going to be paying towards the higher end of your scale. So as we look at the preparation phase here, so the ESS represents the executive search services. So that would be your search firm. The board, that's you, and then the district here. Now, I want to break this to you as gently as I can, but generally speaking, when we talk about the district, then we're talking about these two lovely ladies over here that provide your administrative support. Because they're going to be the ones that are going to be representing the district and making sure that meetings are posted, that things are added to the website, that rooms are secured for, for interviews and for the public input sessions, all those kinds of things. Because your search consultant is not going to know the district quite like your administrative assistants are. And so it's going to be up to them to say, okay, so this is the room that's going to be, best to meet in, and I've secured it because we have no other meetings going on in that room on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, that kind of thing. As we get the posting out there, we generally recommend that as a district, you create a separate page for the search, link that to your main page, and then on that page, you're going to put all the relevant dates. You're going to put a link to the online survey. You're going to put a link to the job posting, and all of that needs to be updated. So again, we would provide the information, or your search firm would provide the information to your administrative assistants, and then they would be responsible for getting it to the right people to make sure that it gets uploaded, things along those lines. So when we talk about preparing the timeline and the process, that is up to your search firm. You're going to then approve that timeline and process, and then we're going to leave it to the district to post all that information on your website, to your Facebook page, send out the tweets, whatever it is that you do. Send it out in your district emails, put it in your newsletters, just to make sure that everybody knows these are the meeting times. This is when the community is going to have an opportunity to talk with a search consultant. This is when the interviews are going to be. This is when we anticipate making a decision, all that kind of information. So your search firm should prepare a salary comparison for you. You as a board then take that information, establish that salary range. The search firm is going to draft a preliminary posting and then get approval from the board before they post it. And then once that is posted, we would encourage the district to then post a link to that preliminary posting as well. Your search firm will facilitate the stakeholder input. As a board, you will help the search firm kind of identify those key stakeholder groups that you want to make sure that the search firm talks to. And then it will be up to the district to arrange and then promote those meetings. The search firm will create the online survey collector. You, again, as a board, will promote that, and then as a district, will promote that online survey as well. Promote the opening is the responsibility of your search firm. Communicating the process to the community is your responsibility as a board, and then again, promoting that opening is up to the district. So you've already talked a little bit about transparency. A little quote here: the lack of transparency results in distrust and a deep sense of insecurity. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything as transparent as possible. Make sure that we're in compliance with the OMA. People support what they help create, so we want to provide avenues for input while maintaining your role in the decision-making process. At the end of the night, this is a board decision. This is not a search firm decision. This is not a community decision. This is not a staff decision. This is a board decision. Your search firm is here to facilitate the process. Your search firm is here to collect the applications, to post the job, to advertise the job, to facilitate the process of the interviews and all of that. The search firm is not here and should not be here to recommend candidates to you. That is up to you as a board to figure out who it is that you want to talk to, who it is that you want to interview, and who it is that you ultimately want to hire. The search firm is here just to facilitate the process, to do all the things that you as a board don't necessarily have the time or the wherewithal to do. So yes, we have the application system in place. Your search firm will have the application system in place. Your search firm will have all of the methods for collecting all the resumes and then presenting them all to you as a board to evaluate. So all of that legwork that you as a board should not be responsible for. That is what your search firm is there for. So lean on them for that. Stakeholder perspective, as I was talking about earlier, in the search for a new superintendent is essential to good outcomes and must be carefully planned for. Neglecting to engage key stakeholders early and often is one of the most common points of failure. If you're going to ask stakeholders for their opinions, make sure it counts for something. So if your community is telling you that these are the things that they're looking for, make sure you take that into consideration as you start to put together that criteria. We do that stakeholder, your search firm can do that stakeholder survey through a couple different ways. So we have the online survey. You have those face-to-face focus groups. Those are actual meetings that you have with those community groups. Feedback forms that are provided. So after the first round interviews, anybody that is here for the process would be given a form to fill out, and those forms would then be returned to the board so that every board member could see how those members of the community felt about how those interviews went. After the second round of interviews, again, those feedback forms are provided, and then we also generally provide an opportunity for questions so that during that second round interview, members of the community can write down questions. We hand those to the board president. Board president then makes sure that we have time, make sure the questions are relevant, not illegal, not repetitive, and then you may choose to ask some of those questions from the community of the candidates. And then again, those feedback forms. So the recruitment phase should be an ongoing cycle that starts with marketing the position, contacting the candidates, receiving the applications, screening the applications, checking the references, and just around and around and around we go. So during that recruitment, you'll get a status update from your search firm. You'll get that presentation of the stakeholder input. You'll collect that, develop that selection criteria that we talked about. You will start to talk about what the interview process looks like, and then you will continue to promote and recruit. So during that phase, your search firms are responsible for compiling and presenting the information. You would consider that information. District's going to post the meetings. Your search firm's drafting that selection criteria. You're going to revise and approve that selection criteria. We post it. You start working on contract language. So the recommendation generally is during the process, start working on your contract that you're going to offer to your final candidate so that it's ready to go, okay? And ideally, if you get down to 2 or 3 candidates, you can present that contract to each of those candidates so they know what it is that they are willing to accept, or they know what changes they would like to present to you, right? So that when you give them that contract, it's not a complete surprise to them. This is also an opportunity for you as a board to take a look at what's been in past contracts and decide what kinds of changes and adjustments that you want to make before you then offer those to the candidates. And then, as always, we highly recommend that any contract that you come up with, that you vet with your local counsel. So whether you use Troon or whoever you use as your local counsel, make sure that they have a look at that contract and make sure that the contract is legal and you have all the things in there that you need to have, and you've pulled all the things out of there that you don't need to have. We promote the opening. You encourage candidates to apply. This is an important thing. If you have, as a board, if you have a candidate in mind that you think would be an excellent candidate, then our recommendation is you reach out to your search firm and say, hey, I think that Joe Smith would be a fantastic candidate. Can you please reach out to Joe Smith and make sure that Joe Smith is aware of the posting and that Joe Smith is encouraged to apply? Absolutely. Okay? We always talk to the board members and let the board members know. First of all, we discourage applicants from reaching out to board members directly. It happens. If they reach out to you, we always encourage you to redirect those candidates back to the search firm and the job posting. Okay? Same thing if anybody in the office gets a phone call from somebody that has questions about the search, then we always encourage you to redirect those calls back to the search consultant or the search firm. And that's what you're paying them for. So they should be handling all of those inquiries from the candidates. Okay, so as it says there, directing the candidates to the ESS, communicating the process, etc. So during that interview phase, we have those first round interviews. Occasionally, we may do writing assignments if that's something that you want to look into. Second round interviews, and occasionally you may have them present a presentation to you during those second round interviews. And then this is also an opportunity to bring those candidates into the district and give them a an opportunity to tour the district. So a lot of times those second round interviews, if they're on a Tuesday, then the candidates might come in during the day, maybe have lunch in one of the buildings, and then tour the campus, and then maybe hold an open house at 5 o'clock where members of the community can meet the candidates, and then start the interviews at 6 and 7 and 8 or whatever, and then have your interviews that night. And then you as a board can determine whether or not it is appropriate or whether you want to make a site visit to that candidate's current district. One of the things that I want you to remember about this entire process is that the interviews are actually the least reliable predictor of success in the selection process, okay? Does anyone have any idea what the most predictive quality is as to whether or not someone will be successful?
Experience, track record.
Exactly. If they have been successful in their previous experiences, they are more likely to be successful in their future experiences. So if they sit here and just absolutely knock your socks off in the interview, but you look at their experience and it's not quite what you want it to be, make sure that you take that into consideration. Conversely, and this is where I see it to be a bigger problem, is when you have a candidate that on paper is, the rock star that you've been looking for. And every time you talk to anybody that's ever worked with them or any of the references, they reaffirm that. And yet they sit here at the table in front of all of you, in front of a crowd full of people, and they just absolutely tank that interview. It just does not go well. It's just uncomfortable, okay? Don't discount that candidate, because everything on paper, every reference that you talk to says that this person is just an absolute stellar candidate. They may just not interview well. They may have had a bad interview, whatever it is. But don't get hung up on the fact that they did not present as well as you would have thought, because everything on paper tells you that they're worthy of consideration. So just keep in mind that that interview is not the most predictive. It's one of actually the least predictive as to how successful they're going to be as a candidate. Behavioral-based interview questions are important for this. I personally don't care what kind of tree that the candidate would be, if they could be any tree that they wanted to be. But I am concerned with what they've done in the past. So I want to talk about a time that you had to make a difficult budget decision, what that decision was, how you got there, and what was the outcome, okay? I want to know about a time that you had to make a tough disciplinary decision. What was that decision? How did you go about it? What factors did you consider? And what was the ultimate outcome of that? That's what I want to hear in an interview. That's what I think you want to hear in an interview. So make sure that your questions are based around that. Talking about the things that they've done in their past that are going to translate well to how they're going to be the next superintendent in Wayne-Westland, okay? And interviews cannot replace and should not replace reference checking and due diligence regarding the track record of the candidates. During the board workshop on interview training, on interviewing, your search firm should give you a little bit of interview training. Start putting together those interview questions, talking about your due diligence and preparing for those interviews, and then starting to do some screening of applications. Yes, sir.
Jay, before you get too far away from that, I'm hearing you say at one point in the presentation that let your ESS do the background check, do the vetting, and then I kind of got a different picture from you as far as board members
Yeah.
checking backgrounds.
Right. So generally speaking, the way that I would advise is that during the beginning of the process, before they've actually accepted interviews, you're going to let your search firm kind of do some of that early on vetting, right? Because they're going to be able to reach out. So if you have a well-connected search firm, okay, so I'll just give you an example. So for example, I see every application for every superintendency that we as a search firm do in Michigan. So every search that we do, whether I'm doing the search or not, I'm seeing every application because I proofread every one of those packets before they go out the boards. That's one of my responsibilities. So as a result, I have a pretty good handle on just about every candidate that's applying for a superintendency in the state of Michigan right now, okay? So I can reach back to, okay, so I talked to that person before. In that particular opportunity, they did a really nice job, so I think they may be a good candidate for this, so I'm going to encourage them to apply for this one, right? That kind of thing. I can then lean on my consultants who've been out there working and say, hey, what do you know about so-and-so? What do you know about so-and-so? Do you think they'd be a good fit for Wayne-Westland, right? All of that can happen without potentially violating their confidentiality, right? Because my consultants aren't going to violate their confidentiality. I'm not violating their confidentiality. We're not calling the references. We're just talking to other people that I know that person that aren't going to violate confidentiality. Once they have accepted an interview, then I'm going to start to work with the board, and I'm going to actually give you some homework. And some of that homework is, okay, Fred, I'd like you to call these 3 references, and Melody, I'd like you to call these 3 references, and then David, please call these 2 references, and then you as board members can start doing some background checking and some reference checking of your own. But on the front end, I want you to refrain from that because I don't want you to have a preconceived idea of who these candidates are until you've actually had an opportunity to interview them, and I don't want you to inadvertently violate their confidentiality. So does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay.
And anyone that has questions, with the
Yes,
study session,
absolutely.
just feel free to.
Absolutely. So generally speaking, your first round is going to be 5 to 7 candidates that you're going to call in for first round interviews. You're going to create a controlled environment. And what I mean by that is those 5 to 7 interviews are going to be the exact same. You're going to have the same 17 to 20 questions. You're going to ask every candidate the same question because we want that first round to be very controlled. Everyone has the same experience. So that gives you an opportunity to judge them all on the same kind of questions and the same kind of experience, right? We're again asking those behavioral-based questions, and we're going to refrain from follow-up questions during that first round because, again, we want those to be consistent. Now, if they say something that you're not quite clear on and you need a little bit of clarification, that's one thing, but we're not going to get into, going down the rabbit hole, if you will, on those first round interviews. During the second round, then we'll have more of an opportunity to have a conversation with those candidates. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Generally speaking, there's 2 ways that you can do these first round interviews. You can do that on 2 consecutive nights. So you can do 3 on a Tuesday, 3 on a Wednesday, done. The nice thing about that is it's a little bit less fatiguing on you because you've got 2 nights of interviews, and it is generally easier to schedule those evening interviews. But sometimes that can make it difficult to recall, the candidate from the previous night when you're on that 6th interview on the second night. And there's also that those second round candidates may get whiff of the questions that were asked of those first round, of the first night candidates. So the other alternative is to do a all-day Saturday. So you do 3 before lunch, you do 3 after lunch, okay? Now, again, the nice thing about that is that it's fresh in your mind. You've just seen all 6 candidates right there. It saves your evenings, but it's a long day, okay? It is a long day. And so just some things to consider. But generally speaking, that's our recommendation, is one of those 2 ways for those first round interviews. Second round, try to get you down to generally 2 candidates. So take from that 5 or 7 that we had in that first round down to about 2 candidates. Have them begin with that tour of the district. Have an informal open house reception prior to that. The second round is going to be a more casual conversation. It's going to be, in your first interview, you talked about this program. Can you give us a little bit more information on that program and how you were instrumental in putting that program together, what kind of benefits students have seen from that program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. During the first round, you mentioned that time when you had to make that tough budget decision. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? We want to hear a little bit more about that. So that second round allows you an opportunity to have a more of an open conversation with the candidate, and those questions for the second round are going to be based on things that we heard in the first round and questions that may have come up between the first and second round, okay? So, Mr. Smith, talking to one of your references, they said that you are an exceptional leader, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, give us an example of a time that you thought that you were an exceptional leader, right? So, follow-up questions are definitely encouraged in that second round, and again, it's more of an open conversation in that second round. So again, during the interview phase, and I won't read all these through to you, but you can see what the search firm should be responsible for, what you as a board are responsible for, and what the district is responsible for. So when we talk about the interviews, the main crux of it is that we're going to rely on you as a district to determine the best setting for an interview. If it's in this room, then what's the best way to set it all up? Now this is pretty much pretty structured. The biggest difficulty I would see with this particular room is just that, especially sitting in this particular seat, is that I don't have a really good contact with these board members up here behind me. So you may want to do something where maybe you move a table kind of here in the middle so that that person can see all of the board members. You can see the candidate, and then the candidate can also be seen. This is the other problem with this particular viewpoint right here. I have my back to many members of the community here, and it would be nice if they were able to see my inflection and my body language and everything as I'm answering the question. So just some things to consider as you figure out what room is going to be most conducive. So again, you as a district are going to have a better idea of your facilities and what room is going to be best. So your search firm should set up the interviews with the candidates, okay? You as a district are going to figure out the location and the logistics on that end, all right? As we talked about, board members should refrain from checking out candidates until they've accepted interviews. The search firm should do some of that research prior to narrowing the process, or prior to the narrowing process. So then those final interviews, you'll identify those finalists. You'll put together your district visit setup. You will talk about the possibility of visiting their home district if you'd like. And then again, the decision preparation and the board meetings and the contracts, that's all gonna be up to you as a board to kind of work with your administration and put those things together.
Excuse me,
Yes, sir.
Jay, through the chair. How would you respond to districts that are giving you whatever story because they're actually wanting to get rid of their superintendent? They're not going to say anything bad about him or her. You know, they're just this kind of glowing report because they want to be free. So how do you respond to that?
Right.
How do we beat that?
Sure. So, you know, you're going to want to, you know, look at as many different things as you can. So obviously you're going to want to talk to the references that they have included, okay? Because generally speaking, the references that they include are people that are going to speak well of them. Although I can tell you on more than one occasion, I've had board members call references and then come back to me and say, yeah, that reference told me that they weren't quite ready yet. So it happens. But generally speaking, the references are going to speak, you know, very positively of the candidate. You know, I encourage you as board members to reach out to the boards of those districts and talk to those board members. Now, I know all of you are very involved with MASB, and I know all of you know board members in lots of other districts in other parts of the state. I know you have contacts, and so you reach out to those board members and say, hey, you know, we're looking at so-and-so for a possibility of being our next superintendent, you know, board member to board member. What do you know, right? And then we'll also take a look at, you know, we're going to take a look at the tangible. So, you know, you can take a look, you know, you have access to, and your search firm has access to all the academic data for every district in the state of Michigan. So look at their academics. If they've been a superintendent in a district for a significant amount of time and they're touting their academic achievement in the district that they've been in, well, take a look. Does it support what they've been saying? If they tout the fact that when they got to that district, they were at 5% fund balance, and now they're at 25% fund balance, well, that's an easy enough thing to check out, right? And so how much responsibility did they have in that process? So I don't want you to rely just on references. I want you to rely on every bit of information that you can get yourselves, every bit of information that your search firm can get themselves. And, you know, we're going to do your search firms are going to do everything they can to present you with the best candidate pool possible and help you kind of wade through that and find the candidates that most closely match your search criteria, and then facilitate that process of you having those questions and having those references checked and trying to find that next great superintendent from Wayne Westland. Okay? Does that address?
Thank you.
Absolutely. So as we said, feel free to research those candidates between the first, second round interviews, and then if you do find a concern, share it promptly with your, you know, your search consultant. So I'll just give you a quick little story about this. I was doing a search, and a board member came out to me and said, okay, so I have a concern about one of the candidates. Somebody came to me and said that the candidate in their current district did X, Y, Z. And I said, okay, let me look into it. So I called every person on that candidate's reference list. I called people that I knew that knew that candidate. I called the candidate themselves and said, hey, this is the story I'm hearing. I'm hearing that in your current district, you did X, Y, Z. Is it true? The candidate said, no, that's not true. This is what actually happened. Every person that I talked to backed up the candidate, said, that's not what happened. I can't imagine that happened. This is what I know about the candidate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I then go back to that board member and to the whole board and say, okay, one of you brought me a concern that you had heard that this candidate had done X, Y, Z. I can find nobody to corroborate that story. I can find no information that says the candidate did X, Y, Z. Now it's up to you as a board to figure out how you're going to process that information, right? On the one hand, you have one person that said this candidate did X, Y, Z. On the other hand, you have several people that have no knowledge and cannot corroborate that at all. As a board, you have to decide whether or not what you want to do. In this particular issue, or this particular situation, that board decided that for whatever reason that story was what it was. It didn't affect them. They decided to continue to talk to that candidate. The candidate was interviewed, did not ultimately get the job, but it had nothing to do with that accusation. It had more to do with the fact that that candidate was not as qualified as the other candidates, okay? But that's should be your search firm's promise to you that there will be no surprises about this process. And part of that is that as you, as board members, hear things, you need to take that to your search consultant, and then you should rely on your search consultant to also then bring anything to you that they hear as well. So if in the process of, and this is a true story, if in the process of vetting some of the early candidates, your search firm comes across a candidate that during the middle of a board meeting calls for recess, goes out into the parking lot, takes a baseball bat to their own car, and then comes back into the board meeting and claims that during the recess, a board member took a bat to their car, when the film from the parking lot clearly shows the superintendent bashing in their own car, okay? If I find that news article, I'm definitely going to bring that to you and recommend that you take a look at this article based on one of the candidates that you are considering as, So again, any of that kind of information that your search firm finds, they should be relaying that to you so that you can take that information and in context of the entire search, use that as it needs to be shared. During the decision-making phase, we want you as a board to coalesce around the candidate that you think is most likely to be successful. We want you to offer that position contingent upon agreement. We want you to negotiate that agreement with the candidate and then have a public announcement and start to onboard that candidate. So we talked about this a little bit already tonight. So those predictors of success, what needs to happen in the district, turnaround, trust building, strategic planning. So think about the things that you're looking for in your district and what kind of past responsibilities, what kind of past performance do they have that's going to most line up with those things that you're looking for. Cognitive function. To what extent can this individual think, learn, and solve problems? And that's where some of the behavioral testing can possibly come in. And then past performance. Has the individual been successful in similar contexts, even if the role wasn't identical? Remember that tenure, there is a positive correlation between superintendent tenure and student achievement, and that positive effect can begin as early as 2 years into superintendent tenure. So during that decision phase, your consultant should be available to you to answer questions. As a board, you need to consider whether or not you want to do a site visit, and then the district's going to post those meetings. Your search firm is there to facilitate your board decision-making process, and then you, as a board, need to decide on the candidate to be offered the position. Your search firm will notify the candidate and notify the candidate that has not been chosen, and then the board will vote on superintendent contingent upon successful negotiation of that contract. You will negotiate the contract, and then we always recommend you check with your attorneys. When we talk about superintendent compensation, we want that range to be comparable to similar districts. We want to publish it with the posting. We want to make sure that you have that draft contract language ready and available for your finalists. Your search firm should provide you with some supports after the search has been conducted and concluded. Some of the support services that MASB provides, we have a cadre of retired superintendents that serve as area representatives. So they're each assigned an area of the state. They make visits with all new superintendents within their area and talk to them about what kind of supports that they, as an experienced retired superintendent, can provide. We also provide a free post-soup workshop. So we have a post-search workshop that we would come in and provide to you that's free of charge other than expenses for your consultants. And that's going to be on goal expectation and a little bit on roles and responsibilities. And then we, as an association, also provide a facilitated evaluation, and that facilitated evaluation is something that we provide to you at a discounted rate, and that is going to be an opportunity for you as a board and a new superintendent to have an outside counsel as you go through that first evaluation. By law, you have to evaluate your superintendent on an annual basis. You have to assign a rating of highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective.
Jay, I got one question.
Yes, ma'am.
So since we had like 3 interim superintendents, how would that work with the annual evaluation?
Yeah. So, come June, your district will file a rep report. And that's a report that goes to the state. And in that rep report are all kinds of little things about evaluations and finances and all kinds of different information. One of the elements of that rep report is a current superintendent evaluation. So come June, you have to file something. So my recommendation would be that you do an evaluation of your current superintendent at the time that you did your last evaluation. So when did you do your last evaluation?
This time.
Right around this time. So I know that your current superintendent has not been your interim superintendent for a terribly long time. So if you want to stay on that annual calendar so that when you hire a new superintendent, their first evaluation would be next November, then I would suggest you do a evaluation sooner than later. Obviously, it's going to be it's going to be a different kind of evaluation than normal, but you still need to kind of talk about the things that are working, the things that are not working, and if you anticipate keeping the interim superintendent until the end of the school year, then you're going to need to give them some direction, and so that direction can come up through that employee evaluation, right? And so the evaluation is going to say, hey, these are the things you're doing well, continue doing these things, you're doing great. These are the things that we think you could do a little bit differently or improve on, and these are the things that we'd like to see for the remainder of the year. So I think that in order to keep you on that November evaluation cycle, you should think about doing an evaluation of your interim, and just recognizing that not everything that's in the instrument, not everything that's part of the evaluation process is necessarily going to apply because they've only been with you for a short amount of time.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Absolutely. So that support phase, again, your consultant's going to be responsible for answering questions, facilitating that workshop, checking in with the new superintendent periodically. As a board, you're going to develop a plan to help orient the new superintendent. You're going to participate in that workshop on goal and expectation setting. You're going to establish those first-year performance expectations for your new superintendent. And then as a board, you're going to check in with your new superintendent sporadically. Excuse me, the district or the superintendent now is going to take an active part in orientation, develop a plan of entry, schedule and participate in that workshop that we talked about, work with the board to establish the first-year expectations, and then contact your associations for any kind of additional support. So that is the pre-search in a nutshell. I went through that pretty quickly, but I think that you got the materials in front of you. I think you've got a pretty good idea of what the pre-search looks like, of what the search looks like. How many of you were here for the last search? Okay, so most of you have been through a search, so you know what to expect for the most part. Questions, concerns, anything that we didn't talk about tonight? Yes, ma'am.
I just have one more question about the tool for the superintendent evaluation.
Sure.
How does that work? Like, you have to use the same tool every time, because don't everybody have to be trained in that tool?
Yes, the recommendation is that you're trained in the tool that you're using. If you change the tool, then you would want to then be trained in that tool.
And how would one have one come out to get the members trained? How does that work, the process?
So which tool are you referring to?
The MSAB one that we have.
The MASB tool. So if you would like a full training on the MASB tool, then you would want to reach out to someone at the office. Debbie Stair is responsible for scheduling the full-on board workshops. We also offer monthly webinars. There will be one tomorrow night, as a matter of fact. But those are more for one or two board members that had were appointed or weren't there during the last training, whatever, that need to pick up the training. If you need a full board training, then we recommend that you have a full board training with a facilitator and do that as a board so that you can all ask the questions and everyone can hear the answers and you can all talk about those situations which are unique to your district. Questions about the search process, what you should be looking for in your next search firm?
Mr. Neal?
Yes, sir.
Well, I had the pleasure of being in your class at the leadership conference and, of course, listened to you tonight. And my question is, if we were to engage your search process, how do we know who's going to be our person? I mean,
So-
I listen to you and have
Sure,
confidence in you, but who's
sure.
our person?
So we would have, we would have that discussion as a board in a firm. So if you decided to go with MASB, then we would have that discussion and determine who you think you would be most comfortable with as your search consultant. And so we can definitely have that conversation. And if you have a preference one way or the other, then we can do what we can to work with you and make sure that, that you're satisfied with whoever your consultant is.
And if we were to make a decision on a search firm, and it was your firm, then how long does it take to get engaged?
So the first step would be to put together a formal proposal for you to consider as a board. And that formal proposal is going to lay out all of the responsibilities that the search firm is taking on as part of this process. So these are the things that we as a search firm are going to do for you during the process. And that, of course, is also going to include cost and everything. And so once we have that signed contract, once we have that signed proposal, then it's going to be up to you and the consultant to start to sit down and get your dates together and, try to figure out how it's going to work. Now, obviously, as we're getting into the holiday season, it's going to be a little bit tougher to kind of get calendars and schedules together. But as soon as we get that signed contract, then, we're off to the races and starting to, get settled in and start figuring out that timeline.
And your fees are based on a student count,
Yes.
you said. And is the fee that you charge now similar to what it would have been a couple of years ago, 2 years ago?
There are going to be factors that are going to most likely increase the cost from then.
Okay. And if the student count went down, then of course that would change that number as well.
Yeah, well, it's going to be, it's a combination of student count, but then also a combination of the fact that that was several years ago and inflation and everything else. And so, and our costs, we have increased our workshop fees. If you've noticed, for the first time in a very long time, we increased our workshop fees. And along with that, we did increase our superintendent search fees as well. So there will be an increase from what you had 5 years ago. Does that sound about right?
2.
Okay.
Oh, was it only 2?
2 years.
2 years.
Oh, okay. But yeah, there will definitely be an
3 years
increase.
prior to
Yeah.
that.
And one last question.
Yes, sir.
Related to that, and that would be the fee that you determine based on head count. I know there's other factors. Is it a range, like between this count and this count, or is it actually based on a per student head count?
It's
as
a
well
range.
as the other factors?
Yeah, it's a range.
Range, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep,
Any
absolutely.
discussion? Mr. Buckler?
I'm good, thank you.
Anybody in the audience like to make a comment? It's a study session?
Where's the mentor come from?
I'm sorry?
Who chooses the mentor? You mentioned through this process that a superintendent has a mentor.
If you hire a non-certified candidate, then you have to assign them a mentor. If you hire a certified superintendent or certified administrator, they do not have to have a mentor, but the association that is across the hall from us, the Superintendents Association, generally recommends that new superintendents, and MASA has gone through and has several superintendents that have been trained as mentors. And so MASA would most likely reach out to you and say, I see that you have a new superintendent in place. Is there any way that we can help you with a mentor? And if you have a new superintendent and you would like a mentor, then you can definitely reach out or have your superintendent reach out to MASA, and they would recommend somebody that they think would be a good fit.
For the record, Don, our current interim superintendent does have a mentor, Dr. Carnell, and our previous superintendent also had a mentor.
What about the one before that?
Yes, she did.
She didn't, yeah.
You can also get a mentor from Risa also.
The procedure of selecting a search firm, how typically is as you've said, every member of the board has a relationship with MASP. Matter of fact, I'd like to congratulate our secretary, Mark Neal, who has achieved all of the classes necessary to become a certified board member. So congratulations, Mark.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I also like to mention that Carol has earned the President's Award too. She'll get presented with it next year.
Congratulations, Carol.
Fantastic, Carol.
So this Board of Education has a very close working relationship
Yes.
with MASB. And we were a certified board last year, and we'll be a certified board again next year. And so naturally, when we have questions of this nature, we reach out to those who are close to us. How typically does MASB get an assignment to do a search? Do you sit with other search firms and do a presentation? Are you called and you're just chosen? How typically does it work at your office?
Yes.
Both ways?
Yes.
Okay.
So, if an RFP we had a district that just put out a formal request for proposals, and so we submitted a proposal. They will then go through all of those associations and search firms that have submitted those proposals. They will then decide which of the ones they would like to call in for an interview. They will then call those search firms in for an interview. They will do an interview in a formal meeting, and then after that, they will then take a look at the proposals, take a look at the interviews, and decide who they would like to go to. We have boards that will just call us up and say, hey, we want you to do a search. And then we have boards that call us up and say, hey, can you send us a proposal? We're getting proposals from several others, and then we're just going to look at the proposals as a board and then decide, or we're going to look at the proposals and then have you come in and do a formal pitch where you're going to be talking specifically about what your firm is going to do.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, please. Would you mind going to the mic so that we can, everyone can hear what you're saying? Thank you.
Sue Caudell, I'm the deaf and hard of hearing teacher consultant for Western Wayne County, and I work for Wayne Westland. I think it's important, and I was really excited to hear about that you're gonna have stakeholder input into this, because I don't remember for the last one, or maybe the time before that we ever had input. I stay pretty current, so I could be wrong, but I was excited about that, and that's something that I will push towards all my special ed people to make sure that they get on that and make sure that they're doing the, whatever it is, input, however you get it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because obviously this decision impacts all of us equally. So we appreciate your input. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or say? Sir, please. Don't be shy.
Tav Pauling, I am the Local 4 President for the support staff. I just want to say we did do, or I think the district did, not this last time, but when Harmon was hired, there was a input with the staff, and I was on that committee. And I just want to say that, or can I ask a question? And are we going to search for this new superintendent? Is it going to be somebody in the state, or are you going to look country, across the country to see if you can find somebody? You don't even know that answer yet.
Well, that's true. We don't know the answer yet, but I predict that each member of the board has some thoughts about that. I have some thoughts about that. I think that, I don't think you have to go outside of Michigan to find the talent we're looking for. And I think that going too far away presents some problems, such as Mr. Bennett described tonight, but also the vetting process is made more challenging. And as we all know, Wayne Westland is a unique district. It's very large, and it's unique. And furthermore, I don't think that what Wayne Westland's gone through for the last 6 months is a secret in the educational community. I presume that there are superintendent candidates that know at what stage we're in, and so I'm personally not looking to go too far away, but then I don't want to declare, because as I said to Mr. Bennett when we first started, I'm not going to say I don't want to set someone by January 1st or June 1st. I'm just not going to say. I don't know what's out there.
So one thing I will interject with is that you will be in a unique position in that within the next several months, there will be several, well, actually even right now, there are several large urban districts that have superintendency vacancies. So as I sit here right now, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, Benton Harbor, while not large, would be considered an urban district, and then Lansing are all in the process of looking for superintendents. And so it's an interesting that we normally don't see that number of large urban districts that are looking for superintendents at the same time. You also have some others that have interim superintendents, and whether or not they go to search or not, before the end of the school year is unknown, but there are some other larger districts out there that are also in the process of trying to figure out what their next steps are, that are sitting with some temporary or some interim superintendents as well. So just something to keep in mind.
I appreciate you adding
Yeah.
that. Anything else?
That was it. Just
Thank you.
hope we get a good superintendent.
Appreciate your comment.
President, could you call Don Harris back to the podium, please?
Only if he'll go.
Don, could you give, in your speech, you enumerated several things that the district employees under your care are talking about. Could you enumerate those for us again?
Explain again. What's your question?
What you're looking for?
What I was looking for? Well,
I think you have it on your paper
well,
there.
integrity is one thing. Willing to work with other people. To treating people across the table equally, as opposed to, well, I guess that's clear enough, like that. What did I have?
You said empathy.
Yeah, compassion and empathy, thank you.
Also, you mentioned you didn't want to have somebody that was going to be short-term, looking for a resume enhancement, just going to slide in and slide out of the district. Somebody's going to be here for a while. you want.
Committed.
Right. Well, I think Mr. Bennett mentioned some of that too in his program too, about what you're looking for, where he said about experiences compared to, what's the term, Mr. Bennett? Talent versus experience type
Yes.
of thing.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr.
sir.
Harris.
Thanks, Don. You know, the first thing that I wrote down from what you said, Mr. Bennett, was that the superintendent needs the support of the board, the community, and staff. And seems to me that's a two-way street. That's not up to everybody else, but in order for the superintendent to be successful, that superintendent has to support the people
Oh, absolutely.
that are working for the superintendent.
Absolutely.
And I know why everyone's here, the same reason I'm here, because we care about this school district. And we're going in a new direction. And it's very important to me that everybody feels that they're a valuable part of this direction and this process moving forward. And that will be a prime consideration to me, along with Mr. Buckaloo mentioned weeks ago to me that he was interested in stakeholder involvement. He wanted to know what the community thought, and I certainly agree with him. So, you know, I thank you so much for being here. For those that don't know, Ms. Hines and Mr. Neal came back very excited from the class that Mr. Bennett taught. And was it Traverse City?
Yes.
But they make you go to these places? And
In November, no less.
and I called Mr. Bennett on the telephone and I said, will you please make arrangements to come and talk to us? And he right away said yes, and gee, we really appreciate that, Mr. Bennett. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. So you all have my contact information, so if anything comes up, any questions that you have that you didn't think about tonight and you figured out on the way home or tomorrow or in the shower or whatever, please feel free to reach out and give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'd be more than happy to answer those questions for you.
Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is citizens' comments on non-agenda items. If you have anything you'd like to discuss other than what we've talked about tonight. Seeing nobody, we have superintendent's comments. Madam Superintendent, do you have comments this evening? I do not. Okay, we got a pass there. And review and recommendations, Board of Education, Mr. Buckaloo?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I hope your drive here was better than our drive home from Traverse City.
Or my drive home from Traverse City, yeah.
Oh, geez. That was exciting. We did do stakeholder involvement with Dr. Holt as well as with Dr. Harmala. And it is important that we do that. Somebody at my front door. We probably know what we want as a superintendent, but we need to hear what you have to say to kind of tweak what we're thinking, because we may not have it right. I heard something in Traverse City that no individual in the room is as smart as the room, and it takes all of us to make a good decision. And while that's something that rolls off the lips easily, it's something that we ought to live by. A group decision is a decision that we ought to make. We've got a lot of time to make that decision too, if we start now. I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I think that this board needs to get together and make some initial plans for how we're going to go about that, not the least of which is developing a request for proposal. And just simply get the ball rolling today. If we do that and we have time on our hands at the end of the process, that's not the worst thing in the world. running up against a deadline, not having enough time to do the job appropriately is probably a far greater problem to have to deal with. So with that, I think that there are two things we need to consider. One is that we're an attractive district. We have a bond in our hip pocket. We're making some tremendous changes to our facilities. We voted over $4 million for safety improvements last night, and we're going